little mini one there, I think.
Thank you for joining us. This morning we're going to cover a common question we get, which is how to transfer from a standard Langstroth hive to your Flow Hive. So we're going to show you how to do that, because often people want to get started in bees and they might be looking at getting a nucleus, or they might be looking at getting a package of bees. Basically, another way you can get started in beekeeping is just buy a Langstroth beehive off somebody and transfer those frames to your Flow Hive. So I'll show you how to do that now. Today is a perfect day for it. What you can do is situate your hive that you want to swap into your new Flow Hive, and then wait for a nice sunny warm day to transfer the frames from here into here. So we're going to be in our bee suit. Make sure you protect yourself if you're new to beekeeping. Give yourself a nice gentle start by wearing your gloves and your bee suit. I'm not going to wear gloves, but I'm very comfortable with a few stings on my hands. But in the beginning, wear your gloves. If you've got questions, put it in the comments and we'll get to answering those. Now this is only a small little colony, so while we have all of the pieces here to put together our entire Flow Hive, we won't be needing the super just yet until the bees have really filled out all the frames and are ready for the top box. So we're basically just swapping the bees and their frames from one box to the other. So first of all, you're cracking off the lid. Now normally there's a metal topped lid on top of this. Here we go. So this colony is a bit weak, I can tell already. It actually started off as a swarm and it hasn't really got on its feet yet. So as we go, we'll take a look at each frame as well. Now I've just pulled off the inner cover, a quick check for the queen. Sometimes she will be right on the cover here. And you can lean it up against the hive so she can walk back in just in case you missed her. Now this hive, you can see, has had some work done in it to straighten up the comb, and let's see how they're going. So they've built some comb here. Oh, there's a couple of hive beetles getting around. Straight away I'm seeing there's not much honey in there. So the process really is swapping the frames from here to here. Quite an easy thing to do in your bee suit with your smoker. Wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping, and have a look at the frames as you go to check everything's happy and healthy. Straight away I'm seeing that these bees are a bit hungry. They're not finding nectar. Other hives are, but this hive isn't. That looks like a bit that's been broken off and rubber banded in. I can see that the rubber band marks here, and now they've connected it to the side wall here, and hopefully they'll build that out over time. I can see some nectar glistening here. See that nectar there shining in the cells, so they are bringing in something. But a hive like this that's so weak, it might pay to feed them and get them going. Or the hive next to it, which was also a swarm at the same time that was caught, did really well, and this one's slow, so perhaps the queen is failing and we need to introduce a new queen to this colony. Let's keep going through it as we pick up these frames and just transfer them through to our new box. Today we're covering how to move frames from a conventional Langstroth over to a Flow Hive. Okay, we've got some brood, which is good. I was a bit worried we didn't even have a laying queen, but you can see some brood here. And a queen cup, look at that. So it's possible that they might be going to supersede the queen, which would probably be a good thing in this case, because the queen isn't laying enough eggs to really get this colony thriving. Sometimes a small swarm can take a while to get on its feet. Beautiful. It's so nice to be able to look in at the world of bees and really check out what they're up to, what they're doing. These are just conventional wooden frames, and we've put the comb guide in the top, and the bees have created all this comb themselves, as they like to do, and that's my preferred method in the brood box. But of course you can use foundation sheets, you can mix it up. Some can have wax foundation, some can have plastic foundation, whatever you want to try. Get into it, play around and see what works for you and your bees. Just going to keep going through them, having a look as we go. If you've got questions, sing out.
Oh, okay, Seeds, that was my cue, I just missed that. Seeds, just wondering, you just spotted a couple of those hive beetles. What do you do about hive beetles?
So it's a good thing we're swapping over to this Flow Hive 2 Plus, because at the bottom we have a nice trap for trapping hive beetles. Now all we need to do is put some oil down here in this tray, and the bees will chase the beetles around and a bunch will fall through into this tray at the bottom, and we can catch them in the oil. You can also use detergent and water in the warmer months if you want to. It's less messy than oil to clean up when it comes time to clean your tray. But either one will work. I wouldn't use soapy water in the winter time, or you might see excess condensation in your hive. I think we'll get some oil and show you how to do that as we go as well, because a colony like this in this humid weather is a bit prone to being taken over by those little hive beetles, and it can turn into a hive beetle nest instead of a beehive, which is not what you want. It gets called a slime out when the hive beetle larvae worm through the frame, wrecking all of the brood, and it can be the end of the colony. So good idea when it's humid and hot and you've got beetles in your area to put some effort into catching some beetles. Now this is interesting. I can see they've raised a queen, and the queen has emerged, but interestingly enough she's emerged from the side of this one, which is unusual, and it's possible that that was a virgin queen stinging another virgin queen, and then they've torn it down. So just in front of my thumb there, that's the remains of a queen cup. And look over here, we've got the same thing again. So this hive has raised some queens, and perhaps there's been a bit of a battle of the queens in here, which is good news for us, because we might get a strong queen to really take this hive to the next level, one that can lay a couple of thousand eggs a day and really get the hive going. Any questions? Okay, Trace has just wandered off to get that oil for us. Let's just keep looking at these frames while you think of your questions, and Trace will read them out as we go. So what I'm trying to do is keep them in the same order. The reason why I'm doing that is because if you get comb pressing against comb and the bees can't service that area, the beetles can take advantage and lay in those places, which is not what you want. So if we're careful about the way they go together, if we do have to muddle frames around, just look and make sure you're not pressing the comb of one frame against the other. Make sure there's a gap of at least a bee can get through. So you want at least 6 millimeters for them to get through. Actually 4.3 it would be minimum, but 6 millimeters would be better, and the bees can then service. Okay, here we go. Let's have a look. Now I'm curious to see if we have multiple queens in here right now, because I'm seeing a lot of queen cups, and they've obviously been putting some effort into raising a queen, and you sometimes get this cool scenario where there's multiple in a box momentarily. There's one in there, see that little queen cup? And there's another one on the other side. Let's just have a look. There's 1, 2, 3 of them in the center there, and they are just cups. There's no queen in there. You'd have to get a really good look in the right light down the cells to see if they're raising a queen, if there's a young larvae in there they're feeding. Keep the questions coming in.
Fantastic, Cedar. Just asking, do you need to feed the bees? And if you do, how do you fit a feeder into a flow hive?
Okay, so there's a few ways to do that. I've got a video somewhere where I showed you how to make a feeder, and there's ways you can do it quite easily. Super simple one is you get a Ziploc bag, get some sugar syrup, which you can make easily at home by 2-to-1 ratio, twice as much sugar as water. Cook it up so it all dissolves, let it cool, put it in some Ziploc bags, put that right on top of your inner cover, which is this one here. You take the plug out, and the bees can then come up through that hole and into the roof cavity area, and if you put some pinholes in those bags, they will just suck all the sugar syrup out of the bag. So that's a super simple, cheap, quick one you can make. Another one is you put a jar and you get a nail and punch a bunch of holes in it, or a drill in the lid, and you can upend it, and the airlock means that it won't all flow out, and you just make sure the bees can lick those little holes through this area here. So there's a couple of ways to make a quick feeder. You can also get some feeders that might fit under the lid. There's a round top feeder which fits good enough. You can put under the lid. If you do want to purchase one, you can find them available on the market. Okay, let's keep going through this hive and see. We've got some nectar here, very good to see, so perhaps we don't need to feed. There's quite a lot in here, so that's a good thing. They are finding something. So these bees are doing their amazing work, foraging, flying off. They'll fly up to 10 kilometres or 6 miles if they are hungry to find that nectar and bring it back to the hive. But the weaker the colony is, the harder it is for them to get the nectar if it's far away. A few beetles here. Okay. We'll show you how to do that beetle trap in just a minute. Okay, I've been busy yabbering on. I should be on the lookout for a queen. I'm seeing queen cups, and we've seen some torn queen cells. Interestingly enough, I'm seeing brood, but I'm not seeing young larvae. There's no brood on that one, so I should go back and have a little check for that as well to make sure we actually do have a queen at all at the moment. If there's brood, it means there has been a queen in the last 21 days. If there's no eggs or young larvae but there's brood, it's possible in the last 3 weeks that the queen has died. So we'll go and check for signs of a recent queen laying. Okay, so this has got a little bit we could clean up here. There's no point in having this burr comb here. That'll just make it hard to service later. So we're just going to knock that off like that, and the bees will fill in that area now. Naturally drawn comb here today. We've just got the comb guide in the top. This was a swarm dumped in there, a weak swarm that's taken a while. Now here again we've got a queen cell with a raggy edge showing that a queen has emerged from that cell recently. Another one here. So we've actually had multiple queens in this hive. So the chances are we've got a queen in here, but I haven't seen her yet. Oh. Any more questions?
Yeah, some great questions coming in actually. This one's coming in from Gay on Facebook. I have a 10 frame flow hive that I want to transfer into an 8 frame flow hive. How do I go about it? One brood box and one super 8 frame, or 2 brood boxes and a super. So they've got 10 frames, but they want to go into an 8 frame box.
Okay, so chances are on the edge of your 10 frame box you've just got honey, a bit like we had here. The edge frames have only got honey in them and no brood. So what you could simply do is take out the 2 outer frames and take them away to eat as honeycomb and transfer the remaining 8 frames into your flow hive that is sized for 8 frames. Now if one of those frames has a little bit of brood in it, then what you could do is put that frame on its side under the roof and take the inner cover out. The bees will go up, take the plug out of the inner cover, the bees will go up there and look after those bees. They'll emerge into the hive and you can take that frame away later. If you do that, make sure you prop it up on a couple of little sticks so the comb isn't resting flat on the inner cover. You do need a serviceable gap between the comb and the inner cover. A little tip there if you do have some brood in those honey frames on the edge.
Great. So it's this one from YouTube from Room Upgrades. Is it safe to have your queen excluder on over winter?
It depends where you are. Here, sorry, where was the location?
Doesn't actually say where they are.
So it really depends where you are. Here we have what is a what would you call it here? We haven't really got a winter as far as the bees are concerned, and we leave the excluder in all year round in the same configuration as you see all these hives in, and it works well for us here. Colder climates with a long cold winter where there's nothing for the bees to forage on for months and months, that's a good time to remove the queen excluder in winter. So the queen is free to move with the bees up through the hive as they consume honey in upper boxes. So a good tip there, remove the queen excluder. Otherwise you'll start the spring with no queen and you'll need to buy in a queen to get that hive going again. So really only applicable to places that get a long cold winter with months and months and perhaps snow as well. Then removing the queen excluder is a great idea, and some people will downsize the hive as well by taking some of the honey supers off. In areas like that it's typical to run taller hives with multiple brood boxes or multiple supers as well.
Right, can I use a medium-sized Langstroth nuke for my flow hive?
So you could, but you're going to need to make some adaptations. Basically what you're talking about is medium frames. Now here I just took this out, I didn't really see the need for that piece of comb being there. It's been rubber banded in but brood's emerged from it and it's just a piece of empty comb we can use for candle making. So there's no honey in it, but I'll put that aside. And your question was about short frames. So
yeah.
A medium size, you've got frames about that long, stopping there. So what you could do, it's a nucleus, so you've just got 5 of them. You could just checkerboard it a little bit. I would keep some of the frames central in the middle where the main brood pattern is. It's always nice to keep it together. And then of the outer ones I would put a deep one beside it and then a short one and a deep one. And what you'll find is the bees will fill in that medium and then they'll probably start hanging some comb off the bottom. So it's a little bit of a hack, but over time you can cycle those shorter frames out towards the edge and out and replace them with deep ones. You may get a little bit of mess to clean up if they start going sideways, comb under here as they try and make a full-size frame from a medium. If you really wanted to be clever, you could attach another comb guide to the bottom of your medium by cutting a slot down there and putting paddle pop sticks in the bottom. That'll be a little bit more advanced, or you might be able to spin the bottom bar upside down, but if it's already going nuke, then it's hard to cut slots or spin that upside down, etc. So you might just have to run with it as it is, let the bees build some comb underneath, slowly move them out to the edges and cycle the short frames out when they're only honey. Great questions coming in. Today we're covering moving from a Langstroth beehive, which is just a basic box like that, across to your Flow Hive 2+. And it's as simple as having a look at the bees, getting in your bee suit, your smoker, moving those frames to this hive and putting the lid back on, look after them, and they'll grow from there. The great thing is if you start with an already going Langstroth hive or a nucleus, you can put them where you want in your yard, wait for a nice warm sunny day like this, and move the bees at your leisure, which could be months down the track. So it gives you an easy start on your terms. If you start with a package, you've got to get into it straight away and get them in your hive. Okay.
Right. See, Clive's got a paper wasp nest in their garden, and just wondering, will they be a problem with the Flow Hive?
They won't. Paper wasps are absolutely fine here in Australia. They're not the friendliest species to have around, but they don't bother your bees at all. There's no wasps in Australia that bother bees. In other countries you have the yellow jackets, which are a bee-eating wasp that you'll need to reduce the size of your entrance with the entrance reducer to give your hive a helping hand if you've got them attacking your hive. But here in Australia there is no wasps that will do that, so you can either leave them be, or if you need to remove them, then having your bee suit and your gloves is a really great thing when you're removing paper wasps. They are quite aggressive species.
This is a good question. We get asked this a lot actually on customer support. Will 3 pounds or 1.4 kilos package of bees be enough to get started, or will they need more in producing more than one, like for one hive? So is 1.4 kilogram the package of bees enough for one box to get started?
Yes, it is. The smaller the package is, or the swarm you catch, a package is basically an artificial swarm. A beekeeper's shaken a bunch of bees into a cage that can be transported in the mail, and they come to you with a queen in a cage and usually some syrup to feed her in transit, and then you put them into your hive to get started. Now, if it's a really small package, it'll just take a bit longer to get started. The bigger colony you start with, the quicker and faster your colony will get on its feet and grow. So my advice would be get what's available and get started, and then look after them and they'll grow from there.
Right. Is it true, Cedar, that if you've got a compost heap near your garden, that will have more hive beetles in your beehive as well? In your Flow Hive?
Yes, hive beetles, or the small hive beetle, is a species that will love compost heaps. So I've got lots in my compost at home, and that is a place where they do breed up. So it depends a bit on how you're doing your composting too. There's supposedly, I've never looked into it, but there is things you can add that will attack the hive beetle species, some types of nematodes or something. If you know anything about that, put it in the comments below. But at my place I don't do anything about it. I just make sure my bees are strong, and if you've got a situation where you've got a weak colony like this one, great time to activate your oil tray, and I'll show you how to do that now by just putting a bit of oil in the tray below. So you can do that by adding oil here. Just use some cheap oil, cooking oil, and you're just putting some in every section like this. The tray doesn't need to be full, and that'll help catch those beetles. As they get chased down through this green bottom board, they will then die in the oil, because the oil will trap the beetles and block their breathing ability. Now the same will happen to bees if you let bees in to this area. So before you put the tray back in, have a look underneath and make sure there's no bees that you're trapping in the bottom if you've had the tray out for a little while. Best time to check or change your oil trays in the early morning before there's a whole lot of bees that might dive underneath when you take the tray out as well. And when you put this vented cover back in, make sure you press it right up against the tray, and that's what stops bees getting up and into the tray area. And you can then close your wing screws like that. So that will help catch a few beetles and give the hive a helping hand. Now, as you know, we have sloped the hive for honey harvesting on a 3-degree slope, but we've counter sloped the tray so it sits fairly level in there with the oil. And just adjust your feet so your level bubbles in the middle there, and that'll help the bees draw their comb nice and vertical and sideways. So this is the main one. Doesn't matter so much tilt in this direction for the bee's comb because it runs this way, and I can see that we could lift, or we could drop this side a little bit, and that would help our cause here by putting that level bubble in the middle. That's it there. Beautiful. So these adjustable legs are great because rather than having to lift up this base and get out the spade to level it up, you can just screw here. You can use a spanner, but often you can just turn it with your hand as well by lifting the hive a little bit and adjusting it like that.
Great. Claire's wondering, Seeds, you were talking before about the queen excluder, and Claire's wanting to do, I think is here in Australia, going to do a couple of splits, but going to leave the queen excluder off for winter. How do you then make sure that you've got the queen back in the brood box in the springtime?
Okay, so to do that, there's a couple of ways. One is you can do an inspection and find her and just make sure she's underneath the queen excluder when you put your hive back together. But if you're not finding her, or that sounds like too hard, then what you can do is get your bee brush out and brush all the bees down to the bottom box. So you'll be going through the box here and brushing all of the bees down underneath the excluder, and that way all of the bees, including the queen, will be downstairs. You put your excluder back on and put your top box on. The bees will come up through the excluder, leaving the queen behind. Okay, a little bit of comb in here. I'm not seeing a queen here, but there's some bees here that are left behind. But let's, just for fun, keep looking through this hive and check for a queen or the presence of one. So I'm looking down into these cells here now, checking for eggs or young larvae. So we're seeing worker brood, which is great. I'm not seeing any eggs, and if you wear glasses you might need them on to see what looks like a little ant egg in the very bottom of the cell. I don't see any, which is interesting. They could be on the changeover between queens, but we must check again to make sure we've got a laying queen. Just turning it around into the light to see if I can see any eggs or young larvae, and I'm not seeing any at all. So we must check again and make sure we have a laying queen in this hive. If not, we're going to be moving a frame from another hive with eggs on it so they can raise a new queen.
Cedar, can multiple queens coexist?
They do sometimes, and beekeepers in a commercial setting will sometimes engineer their hives for just that by putting a brood box on top and a brood box below and honey supers in between with two excluders, so the queens can't get close to each other and they're far enough away that they can coexist without the pheromones being trouble. So that is one way you can have a multi-queen hive, which it will give you more robust resilience when you lose one queen, there's another one still laying. And it also might really increase honey production, having a big hive. Most people go, well, I'd rather just keep two hives than two queens in one hive, but some people swear that it's the way to go, running multi-queen hives. you can get in the situation where you've got a hive this size and you'll find two queens in it, and perhaps there's two virgins that have emerged, and but over time one will be the reigning queen. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, great. Look, I might just mention too, because I had a couple of people asking the price of the flow hives, where you get the flow hives. So I'll just mention, if you go on honeyflow.com, it will sort of pick up your area. There's sites sort of in all different parts of the world, and it'll point you in the right direction. And look, we've got our 9th birthday sale, which is going to be finishing up, I think, about the 4th or 5th of March, depending on where you are in the world. It will be on the front page and the land on it, and also of course we've got the spring coming up in the other side of the world, whereas we're going into our autumn, so it's a great time to sort of have a look at that sale that we've got on for the 9th birthday sale. And if you've ever got questions like that, please contact us and support, me or one of the other autumn team members. We'll be able to help you out with purchasing and making up orders for you. So let's start with all those questions about where do I get my flow hive. Father of the bears, that's a sort of cool name. What have you got a beard like Jed? Wondering, do you plant flowers for the bees to get nectar?
We do plant flowers, but the European honeybee is an incredible pollinator. When this hive really gets on its feet, it's capable of visiting 50 million flowers in a day, which is not something you can plant in a small space. So unless you've got large acreage, you're probably not going to be making much difference to your honey crop by planting flowers. However, planting species that have great pollen for your bees is a good idea, and also planting a flower garden to really look after the native bee species that might only have a short range of a couple of 100 metres. They really do rely on flowers at regular distances. Humans have come along, decimated the wild, and if we can put some of that habitat back for those native bee species, we might just save them from the brink of extinction. So that's the reason why we like the beautiful flower garden. We get the blue-banded bees coming in, we get the masked bees, we get the resin bees all visiting these flowers, and they're all our iconic native species, which you'll be really helping by planting flowers. If you do want to change your honey crop, you'll need to plant acres and acres of flowers, and then you can really make a difference. Okay. We're going to just keep having a look at this hive. So far I'm not seeing any young larvae or eggs in the frames, which means this hive could actually be queenless despite there being larvae still left. It could be in the last 3 weeks that they've gone queenless. Here's one emerging here. Look, here's a baby bee just coming out of its cell, just in front of my finger. You can see its antennae sticking out, it's chewing away. Yeah, it's trying to get out, but it needs to do a bit more work first before it can get out of its cocoon. That's so cool. It will emerge into the hive as a fluffy little baby bee ready to do some of the chores in the hive. One of the first jobs it'll do is cleaning cells. Here it comes out, look at that, that's so cool. Look, here it comes out of the cell. Come on, little bee, there we go, keep going. There we go, it's got its legs working for the first time. It's going to pull itself out now, and you'll notice it's a lot whiter than the other bees. They come out kind of furry and white, and that's how you can tell the difference between new bees that have just emerged out of their cells and the current worker bees. See the difference there? Close, close, keep going. And they emerge into a busy hive just full of thousands of bees all doing their thing, and somehow they know exactly what to do and they get started work. Here we go. Alright, try a little bit harder. We're watching the emergence of a bee. It's been 11 days in the larvae stage, then about another 10 days or so in the cocoon phase where it went through its metamorphosis and grew its wings, its eyes, its legs, and everything it needs to do to be a worker bee, collecting pollen and nectar, collecting water to cool the hive, and all of the jobs it'll do in its short little life as a worker bee. May only live for a month or so, and there it is, taking its first steps in the hive. That's the baby bee taking some wobbly first steps, and away it goes. It's a beautiful thing. Tested its wings for the first time, and there we go. It's away. Time to be a worker bee.
No rest.
Yes, that's it. No one's making you lunch this morning like I did for my kids. Okay. Now, here we go. We'll put that back in there. And what we're going to do is put this hive back together. We're going to come back in a few days' time and check that we do have a laying queen. At the moment, this hive is at risk of being queenless. Sometimes you get into the situation where they have raised a new queen, which we could really see the presence of the old queen cups left behind, and she's gone and mated. She might not have made it back to the hive, or she may have made it back to the hive, or she might be coming back to the hive today. So what we need to do is check in another week, make sure we've got eggs. If we don't have any eggs down the cells, we're going to need to rectify the situation by either buying in a queen from a breeder or getting a frame of brood from another hive with eggs on it, that the bees can have another crack at raising a queen. So let's put it back together now, just by making sure we've got all of our frames in the box. I can see there's a bit of space left over, so there's one frame missing, which is here. I want to make sure that we're not going to squash the bees as we push the frames into line, just by adding a bit of smoke which has gone out. Typically it happens when you're rabbiting on answering questions and forget to run your smoker. But it's a small colony, so I don't think I'll bother getting the smoker going again. I'm just going to manually move the bees out of the way between the end bars here, and just be careful as I push them to make sure we're not squashing any bees between those end bars there. Because what I want to do is push all the frames together and make sure that the spacing is right for the bees. Now the tone just changed slightly. These have been a very friendly colony to work with, but I can tell they're just getting slightly annoyed with me poking around right in the middle of their brood nest, which is not surprising really. If someone ripped the roof off your house and started poking around, you might get a bit annoyed. Okay, here we go. I'm moving all of these frames across and putting in the last frame, leaving excess space on the edges, which is nice to have later when they really start waxing up everything. Leave it on the edges so they don't create burr comb in between. If you leave a frame like that with a gap, they'll likely put comb in between the two, which is annoying to clean up later. Okay, so that's it. We've transferred our bees from this box into our new Flow Hive 2 Plus. Look after them and they'll grow from there. Last thing we're going to do is put on the lid. We've got all the rest of the hive here, but we don't need it yet. We won't need the super till they've finished drawing out all the combs and the hive is happy and healthy with lots of bees in it. So we're just putting on the inner cover, making sure we don't squash any bees. You can see one here fanning its Nasonov gland, going, hey, here's home, here's home. When you see the tail turn down like that and the wings fanning away, they're fanning a scent saying, this is where home is, to help the other bees come home. If I put the lid on across this way and slide it across, that bee will be swept into the hive. And then on top of that goes our gabled roof, like this. And we're just dropping that down over the inner cover, over the hive, and there we have it. We've now successfully transferred our bees from this box to this one. Look after them and they'll grow. Time for one last question.
Oh great, look, just on that super question, Cedar, what happens if you add the super right at the start?
Now, if you add the super early, all you're doing is giving them excess space to look after when they don't really need it yet. So, especially if you're in a cold climate, refrain from adding any boxes till they've really filled their first box. And if you want to add a third box, then wait till they've filled the next box, and so on. In a hot climate like this, you could put the super straight on top with the flow frames in it. Wouldn't really matter because the bees can still keep their brood nest warm quite easily in this warm climate. So we generally say wait till the bees have drawn out all the combs and there's lots of bees before adding your super. And that way you're not giving them any excess space to look after that they don't need.
And what about urban beekeeping? Can you keep beehives in the cities and different places?
Absolutely. So the amazing thing about bees is they're so versatile, from desert conditions to snowy conditions to rooftops in the city to urban backyards or out on farms. You've got this beautiful thing where the honeybees are so resilient and so adaptable that humans can keep them all around the world wherever they are, and it's this extraordinary synergy where if you look after your bees, they do their amazing work pollinating, and lucky for us, they often store a lot more honey than they need, so we can share some too. And you'll find that your veggies will grow better with all the pollination from your hive, and you get to share the spoils in the beautiful honey with your neighbours and friends, and really enjoy what I think is such a magical thing, to be able to taste those flavours of honey coming from the area immediately around you as the bees collect that nectar and bring it back into your hive.
Nice. Louis asking from Melbourne, harvested a few frames over the weekend, but the honey tasted a little bit bitter. Just wondering if you've got any explanations on why that would be.
Okay, that's a really fascinating thing, and often you'll get different flavours from different frames. I've been harvesting honey at my place for, I don't know, more than 20 years in that same location, and just the other day a completely new flavour came in. Bees must have gotten onto new flowers, and it was really bitter. My daughter Mella was harvesting the honey, and I said, what does it taste like? And she goes, oh, it's bitter. I'm like, oh, that's odd. I tasted it and was like, oh, geez, that's really bitter. And I'd never tasted that flavour before. So it's one of the joys, I think, about keeping bees, especially with the flow hive, is you get to really isolate those flavours. So I'll be curious to know what the next frame you harvest tastes like. And I think it's a really nice thing to do, to keep some of that honey, so that when you're showing off your honey, you can get people to taste the bitter one, you can get people to taste the ultra malty dark one, you can get people to taste the really fruity one, and it just brings an amazing story about the bees and the flowers and the foraging to the table, and you'll find it a fascinating table conversation. So well done for noticing, because often people think honey's just honey, but really honey is so different all the way through the seasons, and you'll find that you'll get as many different flavours as you have flowers producing nectar in your area. So it's just an amazing thing to be able to taste those flavours.
Cedar, Chuck's wanting to know, can you mention what the first job is for the new bee, which is the one we've just had lay?
Okay, we just watched the bee emerge from its cell, and one of its first jobs is cleaning the cells that they came out of. And what they do is they give them a good polish up, ready for the queen to lay an egg. And they'll actually leave a little pheromone. It's a bit like a door hanger at the hotel saying, room is ready to go. So that's one of their first jobs, and then they'll be feeding the young larvae. So they'll be nurse bees, getting royal jelly in the first few days, feeding it to the young larvae, and then for worker bees they'll be feeding them bee bread, which is the pollen that they've fermented into bee bread. They'll be feeding the young larvae. And then it's later in their life, let's say if they're living for 4 to 6 weeks, in the last half they might be a forager bee collecting nectar and pollen and bringing that into the hive. So it's incredibly organised with no one particular in charge of the hive, yet they're able to do an incredible feat of spreading themselves out over a 6 to 10 mile radius and bringing all of those resources, the nectar and pollen, back into the hive and storing an incredible amount of honey, meanwhile pollinating a ridiculous amount of flowers as well. So hats off to the honeybee.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. Same time next week. Let us know if you've got questions, if you've got answers to other people's questions, chime in. It's all about helping each other get started.